Hey, everybody, and welcome to the 8th episode of Fully Endorsed. This is Super64, your occasional host, and with me, as usual, is Andres Perez.
Hello, people of the internet.
We do not have a guest this week, but what we do have is a classic comedy from Mel Brooks. You all know Mel Brooks, creator of Spaceballs, Young Frankenstein, Blazing Saddles, and this is his first movie, his first hit. This is the movie that put him on the map, and it is 1967's The Producers.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of interesting because I haven't seen the movie yet, but the Producers obviously I've seen, but I haven't seen one of the movies that was nominated for Best Picture this year was Jojo Rabbit, which was a film by Taika Waititi, which featured some comedy revolving around the Nazi Party, which also plays into Springtime for the Producers and the famous musical number Springtime for Hitler. Mm-hmm. So this is actually kind of timely, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is the original Jojo's Rabbit.
Exactly. You would not have Jojo Rabbit were it not for the Producers. So I guess we'll start, as always, by going over to Andres and asking, first of all, I'd like to give some background on your experience with Mel Brooks, and then I'd like you to tell people what you thought of the movie.
Yeah, so I became a fan of Mel Brooks really around the time that I first met you, Bill, and David. And I remember, like, occasionally Mel Brooks would pop up in conversations. And at that point, the only Mel Brooks movie I had really seen was Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was, like, years ago on television. And I had heard of Mel Brooks' name often, many times. Even to this day, I might get my words mixed up and end up talking about Mel Gibson instead of Mel Brooks.
I can't promise that I won't do that either. So if that does happen, I would ask that the people in the comments take this into consideration.
And yeah, I've been curious about it because I am certainly a fan of comedies. No, wait, Young Frankenstein. I've definitely seen Young Frankenstein a couple of times every October on places like Turner Classic Movies or AMC, any sort of channel that airs classic movies. So I've definitely have watched that a number of times over the years. But yeah, it wasn't until I met you that I believe you were the one that gave me recommendations. And so thankfully, this is around that time I started frequenting my local Barnes & Nobles, and Barnes & Nobles has a beautiful array of classic movies on DVD and Blu-ray, and oftentimes they have like big discounts on them, so I got myself Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein on DVD properly, and the other one, what was the other one that I got? History of the World Part 1, and so started watching those, and that's when
Three great choices.
Most definitely, yeah. So it was around this time that I got really acclimated with a lot of his big hits, but I never got I never had that the chance to check out his original I guess you can say original hit film. But The Producers was one of those movies that I've often heard a lot about, especially when it comes to movies about the Hollywood system or the entertainment business, and how certain people or certain businessmen tend to come up with certain schemes as a means of having like a massive tax write-off and gaining more than they're losing. Or I've often heard about this movie in terms of like the social commentary of Mel Brooks, his background as a Jewish comedian, and his often hilarious and witty jabs at Nazis in general. And that's something that we'll definitely take a look at in this film as well. But I've heard a lot about it over the years, as Mel Brooks is obviously a master of comedy. And Spaceballs. That was another movie that I saw once, maybe in my lifetime on television, which I believe I was too young to get most of its humor, but I believe I did own Spaceballs as another movie I got from Barnes & Nobles. But so I've seen 4 of his movies, and so this is my first the perfect opportunity for me to take a look at The Producers and see sort of the beginnings of his career. and see like kind of like the origins of seeing the starts of many certain tropes that would certainly carry on in his career. And I'm glad to say that I highly enjoyed this film as much as I did his other films.
Yeah, I mean, as far as 4 movies to get into Mel Brooks go, I mean, that's a damn good list. I would recommend that everybody go check out all of those films. Mm-hmm. Had I known that years later we would be doing this podcast, I perhaps would have saved those recommendations. But but here we are. The Producers is again, this is Mel Brooks' first movie. He actually didn't even set out to make a movie. He was going to write this as a book. Then he thought there was too much dialogue, so he was going to do it as a play. And then some people that he knew looked at it and told him that it really didn't work as a play because there were too many locations. Mm-hmm. And he says to them, well, then what is it? And they say it's a movie.
A movie? And what's that?
He's like, well, I've never written a movie, and so he writes it as a movie. Mm-hmm. And it's he really just sort of fell into directing, which is amazing to me because he's
such like a natural at this.
He's such a pillar of comedy, He's sort of the clown prince of comedy, especially of the 20th century. And he sort of just falls into it because he writes this story that winds up turning into a movie. He then convinces the producers to let him direct it by telling them that they'll save a bunch of money because he already knows what it should look like in his head. And it's really one of those stories that don't really happen anymore. One of those stories where somebody in Hollywood's like, yeah, I just sort of fucking fell into it. Like, and what results we got? This has become one of my absolute favorites of his films, honestly. And it was one of the later ones that I saw. I saw this for the first time maybe a year or two ago, and it's really become, I think, one of the ones of his that holds up the most. It's a fantastic film. I was going to say something else. Yes, interestingly enough, part of the story is based on real life, Andres. And would you like to know which part that is?
Please tell me it is Franz Liebkind, who was a real person in real life.
No, sorry, but the truth is almost as good as that.
Okay.
So it turns out that Mel Brooks was inspired to write this story because when he was 16 years old, he worked for a Broadway producer.
Okay.
Who used to finance his films by having
sleeping around,
by having rendezvous with little old ladies who had a lot of money.
Yes.
That is the part of the story that is true.
He should have led this movie with based on a true story.
Yeah. And then I guess everything else just sort of developed out of his brain from there. Mm-hmm.
So
where to start?
I did want to ask, where did Mel Brooks where did he get his career started? How did he get his start in the entertainment industry?
Before falling into filmmaking.
Yeah.
I guess he was involved in plays.
Okay.
Because I know that, like I said, he had worked for a producer when he was 16, mm-hmm. and then I know that he met Gene Wilder through somehow being connected to some of the plays that Gene was in. Mm-hmm. So I think that's how he got into it. I think he was doing stuff, on Broadway, whatever capacity that was.
Okay.
And trying to write his own stuff, and then he wound up with a movie.
And was this Gene Wilder's first movie as well?
It's actually his second movie.
Oh, okay.
Because there was sort of a lengthy process of getting funding for this movie. Mm-hmm. He approached Gene Wilder about the part. Actually, first he approached Peter Sellers about the part, and Peter Sellers had originally.
Was he from the Pink Panther?
Yes, Dr. Strangelove. That Peter Sellers.
Ah, okay.
He had originally approached Peter Sellers. Peter Sellers had apparently, according to Mel Brooks, told him that he would do it, but then after that, Mel Brooks never heard back from him. Mm. So he then found Gene Wilder, shared the script with him. Gene loved it. He wanted to do it. And then 3 years go by, and Gene never hears anything else from him because he's off, because he's off trying to get the money and everything. And then one day, Gene just gets a knock on the door, and Mel Brooks comes in with the producer and says, "We got the money. We're doing this." So it's it was one of those stories. But during the interim, during those sort of 3 years, Gene Wilder had actually appeared in, I believe, Bonnie and Clyde.
Oh wow! Okay.
So this was technically his second film.
Huh. Okay.
Although this is really the one that gave him a career.
Right.
Same for Mel Brooks. This put both of those guys on the map.
Yeah. And this was sort of like the thing that sort of cemented Gene Wilder's working relationship with Mel Brooks. Sort of like he became to Mel Brooks what like Johnny Depp was for a while for Tim Burton.
Yeah, definitely. They would go on to do Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein together. Around the same time, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein came out pretty close to each other.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they both came out in 1974, and I don't know how closely they were made, to one another.
And do you happen to know where Zero Mostel fits into all this? The guy who plays Max Bialystok.
I think this is somebody who Mel Brooks knew through his experience working again, like in Broadway and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because from the research I've done, it seems to me like this is a guy who did a lot of he was in Fiddler on the Roof. He did a lot of stuff like that. He's like a real actor's actor. You know what I mean? Not somebody that sort of the general public would be aware of, but somebody that would be really well known if you were in the know, And Mel actually wrote this script with him in mind. There was never anybody else who he wanted to play Max Bialystok.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it's interesting that he ended up getting two actors as his leads who were both from, I guess, a stage actor sort of background, given how in this movie it's very reliant on these two people, and there are just scenes that go on for a good long while with just these two characters talking in a single room, usually in isolation, and that's where a good bulk of the movie and its development and the comedy all revolves around just these two guys working off of each other in isolated settings.
Yeah, the first I think 20 minutes of the movie.
It's just in that room.
Right, they're in that room, and it's interesting. The first time I saw the movie, I was like, "Wow, this scene is going on for a while." But then the more you get into it, and the more you sort of get wrapped up in the characters, and the performances in this movie are just wonderful. You sort of forget. you sort of get used to being in that room, and then it sort of becomes jarring when they go outside.
Right. And you can also tell that this was originally written to be a play, given the lack of there's lack of scenery sets involved, and it's also kind of funny that it's almost feels like half of it feels like a play, and the other half isn't really.
It's definitely written with a playwright's sensibilities. It's very character driven. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of sort of lengthy dialogue between the two characters.
Right.
And the characters are incredibly well fleshed out. The first act, I would say, is very play-like.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, the second and third acts are much more of a traditional movie.
Mm-hmm. Very true. And it's very interesting how the story itself is pretty basic, and it moves along at a decent pace, and the cast itself is pretty small, where again, most of the focus is on Max and Leo, and eventually works on them finding the right people for their project. The project doesn't work out so well, they try to fix it, blows up in their faces, and that's really the end of the movie right there. All while focusing solely on Max and Leo's budding friendship, as the two of them sort of find comfort in one another, despite them. Almost you root for them even while they're pulling off this heinous scheme of theirs.
Right. While we're talking about the script and how wonderful the script is, I did want to mention that this actually won the Best Original Screenplay Oscar in 1960. I guess 8 would have been the year.
Nice.
So, those of you who don't know, Mel Brooks is an Oscar winner.
A first-timer as well.
Yeah, that's what a fucking story, huh?
Right. That is the true Hollywood story, the Hollywood dream that everyone hopes of. And this fucker got it without even wanting it.
What a story, Mark. That's Mel Brooks for you. Since we've already started talking about it, I guess let's start talking about the sort of central performances. Mm-hmm. Everybody is so good in this movie.
Absolutely.
Especially, I would say Gene Wilder is the standout. I mean, him and Zero Mostel both, they have great chemistry together. They're both good in their roles. But Gene Wilder is such a breakaway in this movie. While we're on the topic of Oscars, he also did get nominated actually for Best Supporting Actor for this film.
Wow.
He did not win, but he was nominated. And he's so good in this film. I think this might be my favorite performance from him, even over Young Frankenstein, just slightly, because of that sort of manic energy that he has in this film, that sort of neurosis, that sort of he's a ball of nerves in this movie.
Right. You know what he kind of remind me of? Like, this character, he's sort of like a very emotionally stunted, almost like man-child sort of neurotic character, where like he's very insecure about himself. He panics at the drop of a dime, and like the moment anything goes wrong, he's nervous, he's sweating up a storm. He almost kind of reminds me of like a more refined version of the type of character Will Ferrell would play in his movies. Whereas like Will Ferrell is more like the asshole man-child. Here, Gene Wilder is, as you said, sort of like the neurotic man-child.
Right. Well, his man-childness isn't from immaturity, like what Will Ferrell usually does. His is more just psychological damage. He's just a very neurotic, sort of nervous, anxious person.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really a perfect role for Gene Wilder. He's so good at portraying that. He also delivers a wonderful speech at the end of the film, which, interesting story. He actually, that was not originally in the script.
Oh, okay.
Gene came up to Mel and said, at the end of the movie, we're in this courtroom and, we're not saying anything. And he says, I think I should say something. And Mel Brooks said, well, what would you want to say? And Gene had already written out what he wanted to say. He gave it to Mel. Mel, changed it a little bit and put it in the script. And so we wouldn't have that speech if it weren't for Gene Wilder's input. And it's a great speech.
Oh, okay.
It really is. It's an emotional highlight of the film. You remember the speech that I'm talking about, right? When they're in the courtroom.
Yeah. And he makes this speech where it's like, he's done a whole lot of stuff, but you know what? Deep down, he's a decent person, because look what he did for me.
Right. And then Max says, may I add, Your Honor, that we've learned our lesson. I will never do it again. So yeah, Gene Wilder, I can't put into words how good he is. Again, Max Bialystock by Zero Mostel, also fantastic. He's great at playing that sort of, lovable con man. he's a real scamp. He's down on his luck, and he's doing what he has to do to survive. And then along comes Gene Wilder with this crazy $1 million, and he fucking goes over the deep end very quickly.
Right.
I love the scene where Gene Wilder is explaining the scheme to him, and he goes, let's assume for a moment that you're a dishonest person. And he goes, assume away. So many great bits of dialogue in the film as well, like that. You also have Kenneth Mars, who plays the Franz Liebken, the author.
Yes.
And
who outranks you?
Yes, that's my favorite line in the movie. You as the audience, I am the author, I outrank you.
I need to remember that line for whenever I receive criticism for my comic.
Right. You need to message who and tell him. No, there's a funny story with that too. So Mel Brooks originally had cast Dustin Hoffman to play Franz Liebken. But then Dustin Hoffman wound up getting The Graduate, and and Mel Brooks, being the nice guy that he was, let him go to the graduate, even though he had technically already signed on to do the producers. Which originally the producers was called Springtime for Hitler. That was going to be the title of the movie. He had already signed on, but Mel Brooks let him, go so that he could go to the graduate. And honestly, I'm kind of glad that it happened that way, because I can't imagine. I mean, Dustin Hoffman's a great actor, obviously, but I can't imagine anybody else for this role than Kenneth Mars.
The psychotic Nazi who secretly still has like a. He almost like the way he talks, the way he worships Hitler, he's almost like in love with Hitler himself in a romantic way.
He has so many of the great lines in this movie come from him too. Another one is like when they're in his apartment and he's ranting about Winston Churchill, and he says his awful paintings. He said, "Now the Führer, there was a painter. He could paint this entire apartment in one day, 2 coats."
What was the explanation he gave for why he was in America?
I don't remember. He just says, like, "I love my new country," and then he starts singing the national anthem. And it's hilarious because while he's singing the national anthem, he has this look on his face like he wants to die. It's great. And Kenneth Mars plays him. When you watch the interviews on the DVD, he seems like he's kind of a crazy person, like a little bit. But and that really hit there. That obviously helps. He specifically requested to have pigeon shit on the Nazi helmet because he figured, I'm up on this roof with these pigeons all the time, and I'm wearing a Nazi helmet. There should be pigeon shit on the helmet. That was his suggestion to Mel Brooks. He also, for whatever reason, decided that it would help him. He was a bit of a method actor.
Yeah.
He decided that it would help him get into the character if he took the costume home and slept in it every night, which he did. So he didn't exactly smell great when they were on set.
No, I can imagine. I can imagine the real Franz doing such a thing.
I don't think we never see him wearing anything else in that movie. So I've always been under the assumption that he just wears it all the time.
He just continued to wear it every day until like the end of production.
Yeah, apparently. So it's an interesting bit of trivia for you. Who else?
Let's see. The director and his like assistants.
Yes. Okay. So this is where potentially someone with a modern sensibility could look at this film and accuse it of being
homophobic,
a little outdated in terms of its depiction of certain communities. That is very true. I remember I was like, there's a particular scene where the director who is flamboyantly gay, he starts dressing up in drag for a costume party, I believe, and so the majority of the humor. We first meet him in the film,
right?
That's the scene. That's like we're introduced to him in that scene.
Oh, right.
He comes out wearing a dress, and a very like ornate dress, like it looks like something out of Gone with the Wind, and he just walks out wearing this thing, And we had already been introduced to his secretary.
Yes.
Who was very, very clearly of that persuasion as well. But it's still, like, I can imagine an audience in 1967 how shocking and also hilarious it would have been to see this guy just walk out in this dress, and you don't know this guy from Adam. You've just met him, and he's wearing this elaborate gown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is a very interesting thing to look at with a sort of a 2020 sense of modern day sensibility, where it's like, back in that day, the joke of having, hey, look, it's a man dressed in drag, isn't that funny? Meanwhile, today, given the cultural, I guess, climate of today, that sort of thing may not be funny. But I feel like within the context of this world, and how over the top these characters are, I found sort of like the entire scenario funny. Not just they got the idea of, look, it's a man in drag, but rather sort of like I was more entertained by Max and Leo's reaction to the entire setup, and kind of laughing at their sort of reaction, and they're sort of like, what the fuck are we, like, how am I, or especially Leo being like kind of like the straight man to this whole group. Or I'm not sure, who would you consider the straight man, Max or Leo?
Oh, definitely Leo. Gene Wilder is so wonderful in that scene because he is the audience in that scene. You look at his face. You look at his face throughout the entire thing. Especially when Zero leans into him and he's like, he likes you. Light a cigarette.
Yes. He's just like constantly flickering it. He's like, please, 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 come on. I want this to be over.
I was like, didn't I meet you on a day cruise? And he's like, I've never been on a day cruise.
It's just like, yeah, so I'm like, I find it still, these characters, just like the entire setup, the dialogue, just everything revolving around the characters. I enjoy like the energy, the chemistry, and I like everything around it, not just like the superficial thing that sets up the whole joke, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I would also argue that he's a fully realized character. Nobody ever like persecutes him in any way in the film.
That is true, yeah. So it is pretty progressive in a sense.
For the way that he is, you know, he might be a stereotype, but it also sort of plays into the plot of the film. The whole reason they go to this particular director is that they're trying intentionally. We should have gone over the premise of the film.
We can quickly mention this right now. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the premise of the film is that so Max Bialystock is a producer. He used to produce Broadway plays that were very successful, but now he's had some flops. He's down on his luck. He's running out of money, and he's scamming little old ladies out of money to produce these plays. Leo Bloom, played by Gene Wilder, is an accountant. He is sent over to do Max's books. He discovers some money that was missing that Max had misappropriated. Max convinces him to hide the money. And then he has this epiphany. And he mentions that a dishonest man, assume away, could make more money with a flop than a hit, meaning you could raise way more money than you actually needed for the play. And then once it flopped, you would get to keep all the extra money because you wouldn't be under any
obligation.
What's the word?
Obligation.
That's the word I was.
To repay the investors.
Right. You wouldn't have to repay the investors if it was a flop, and therefore you would keep all that extra money and nobody would be the wiser. Max Bialystock then convinces Gene Wilder to actually go along with this plan, because Gene Wilder is a very weak-willed man.
Yeah.
Bialystock is very persuasive.
Yeah.
Manipulative, persuasive, and all that. So and that's another fun aspect of this film, is how he starts out very much, you know, trying to take advantage of this man. By the end of the movie, you can tell that they've developed a very sincere friendship. So yeah, that's it. They set out to make a flopped Broadway play. And so in order to do this, they set out to find the worst script they could find. They find a script called Springtime for Hitler, which in Max Bialystock's own words is practically a love letter to Hitler, which is written by the character of Franz Liebken, who we've already mentioned.
Right, the crazy,
and then
crazy ex-Nazi German dude.
Right. And then after they get him, they go off to find a director. And again, they're trying to make this a flop, so they go out of their way to get the worst possible director they can possibly get for this movie. And so who they go and get is this character, Roger Debris, who, as we've mentioned before, is a very flamboyant gay gentleman who is known for doing sort of elaborate, sort of musical type productions with showgirls and things of that nature. And so the worst possible person you can get to direct a historical piece about Adolf Hitler.
Like I guess we could say like he tends to make, from what we've seen of the final piece, of the final play, it seems like he's the kind of person who tends to go for very provocative projects. And it's possible that's what like attracted him to doing Springtime for Hitler.
Think of old school Hollywood musicals, like people that are just bathed in sequins, walking down steps with their arms wide open, singing songs about whatever the hell the play is about.
Although, like the nearly topless women almost caught me by surprise, given the era this movie was made in.
Yeah, there's a fun story about her too that I'll get to when we talk about the infamous musical number.
Okay.
But yeah, so they go after this guy, who's known for doing these sort of like big sort of show girl type productions. Again, worst possible person you could get to direct a play about Adolf Hitler. So the sort of flamboyance of the character sort of plays into that premise, I think, in a way that, at least to me, sort of helps to alleviate the awkwardness from a modern perspective.
And let's see, the next major character, I believe, was the cast, and that's when they got the actor of Lorenzo Saint Dubois, or LSD as he refers to himself as, hippie, played by Dick Shawn.
And who, again, in their quest to make the worst possible play they could possibly make, they get a hippie to play Hitler.
Right, who is like the very chill, very laid back sort of guy, who is almost like the exact opposite personality when you think of Hitler, who tends to be very strict, very shouty, very, stick up his ass kind of individual. And
when we meet the character of LSD, they're doing auditions for the play.
And just seeing an entire room of people practicing their Hitler speech is like the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah, but then we're introduced to LSD. He's walked onto the wrong set, but they decide to see him anyway. And this man who will go on to play Hitler, who has a Campbell's soup can around his neck, I guess that was a thing at the time, and he's wearing these weird boots that go all the way up to his thighs.
Right.
And he's holding a bunch of flowers. He brings on a hippie band, like psychedelic band. And he proceeds to perform like a full song, like a good 3-minute song about flowers and love or whatever. And it's the most it's the hippiest shit you've ever seen in your life. It really has to be seen to be believed. And when he's done, you just hear Max go, "That's our Hitler."
Right. And just like every other character, he LSD just works perfectly. I think he doesn't really talk with a whole lot of other characters. He just mostly it almost feels like the actor is just improvising, as like when he's on stage as Hitler, he's just sort of like half reciting his lines while also mixing it in with his own hippie dialogue, his own hippie lingo.
I'm not familiar with Dick Shawn. I don't know if this man was much of a hippie in real life. Boy, does he play one well.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And so it's a very wild cast of characters that Mel Brooks manages to bring together for this story. I hate to sound like a broken record, but they all work off each other so well. And we would
be remiss not to mention the go-go dancing Swedish secretary.
Right, yes. Which just is a little extra bit of lunacy to help you remind yourself that this is a wacky, almost like Looney Tunes style world we live in, where anything goes.
And again, if you are a feminist in 2020, you can bitch all day about that character, but shut up. It's funny.
It's funny.
It's fucking funny. What do you want?
I think that's the joke. She's just there to look pretty. That
is the joke.
They're not endorsing. It's like the whole Nazi thing. They're not endorsing Nazism, or if that's a real word, I don't care. They're not endorsing it. They're mocking it. Exactly.
It's exactly what Max Bialystock. Yeah,
Max is portrayed as a sleaze for doing this.
Right. It's exactly the kind of thing that he, who has spent years now, sleeping with little old ladies to get money. It's exactly the kind of thing he would do after raising like $1 million in capital and having all this extra cash lying around. Of course, he goes out and hires a Swedish secretary who knows how to go-go dance.
Nothing else. I love that. It's like when he says work, that's what she does.
Right. And even Gene Wilder, who at first is looking at him like, you fucking scuzzball. Even he by the end is like just fucking staring at her while she's doing her little go-go dance routine. Because she is rather easy on the eyes.
Absolutely. I won't deny that. It was casted for a reason.
She was actually just fresh out of acting school when she got this movie too.
Wow.
So yeah, And then later on in the film, when Franz Liebken is trying to murder them, and then she comes in, asking them if they want anything to drink. She's a wonderful character because she's sort of oblivious to all the craziness that's going on around her.
Right.
There's a language barrier there. She doesn't really speak very good English, and so she doesn't really know what's going on most of the time.
And I guess that also kind of plays into like the dumb bimbo archetype.
I wouldn't even say dumb. I would just say, again, she doesn't really know the language.
Oblivious. Like, I'm sure she would tell that those guys are in trouble. She must have heard the gunshots.
So yeah. What were we talking about?
Let's see. You mentioned the director, the writer, the actor, and the secretary. So then we get to the near climax. This is definitely meant to be the low point of this film, where they bring out. Oh, actually, it's the low point for these characters, but it's the high point of the entire film. I feel like if there's one criticism I can make, it's that I feel like the movie peaks too early. Where it's like there's a lot of build up to the play Springtime for Hitler, and it is glorious beyond belief. And it's easily the most standout element that most people remember this film for. And it's got
it is definitely the climax. I would say that perhaps what you're referring to is the fact that the denouement, as they would say in English class, the resolution, if you're a dumb American, is a bit extended beyond what you would typically expect.
Mm-hmm.
We spend a lot of time after the climax sort of dealing with the repercussions of the climax. Again, though, this is an older film, and that happened a lot in older movies, I feel. Nowadays, you have your climax, and then you rush to the ending. But I feel like a lot of older movies, you would have your climax, and then you would sit a little bit longer with sort of the implications of that climax. So it feels sort of in line with the type of writing that you would see at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is definitely the oldest Mel Brooks movie in more ways than just chronologically. You can tell. I mean, it's definitely made with sort of 60s sensibilities, whereas his movies that he would later get become even more famous, his stuff in the 70s was sort of going out and being a little bit more experimental and going completely bonkers. This was more like a movie, like a typical movie of the period,
Mm-hmm. Like,
if that makes sense. I don't know if I've...
Yeah, it does make sense. And I was just mentioning that, like, a lot of the portions, like, the thing with the shootout scene with, or like where Franz, he busts in, he's really upset at how he feels like Hitler's reputation had been tarnished. He doesn't want Hitler to be a laughingstock, which it turns out I just love how Springtime for Hitler ended up becoming the 60s equivalent of The Room, where again it's so bad it's good, and everyone loves seeing the hilarious performance of LSD, and it's like this wasn't what he envisioned it to be, and so
it's so funny, the scenes where he's sitting in the audience reacting to the play.
Right.
And he's like, why does he keep saying this baby? Hitler has never said this baby.
And what was it? I love the scene where, that scene where they're trying to convince him. He's like, shoot the director people, shoot the audience. Like, no, don't shoot them. It's like, I do not know what I should do. Please make up your minds. And and then, they do this thing where they try to blow up the theater as a means of making the production a bomb, losing money. But I feel like that whole sequence there could not live up to like the heights of the actual Springtime for Hitler sequence.
That's fair.
That is fair. Despite ending things literally with a bang, I feel like maybe that scene could have gone on just a little bit longer. Of these guys, attempting to rush out of the maybe it would have been too expensive, but them attempting to rush out of the building as it continues to blow up and everything's falling around them, and them just reacting to everything. But then it would have turned into a very different movie and potentially a more expensive movie. I don't know.
It could be argued.
Yeah.
Oh. It could be argued that there are really two climaxes in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
There's the comedic climax, which is the Springtime for Hitler number,
mm-hmm.
and we are getting there. But the emotional climax of the movie, I would argue, is the scene that I already talked about in the courtroom when Gene Wilder gives the speech.
I feel like you can easily jump from the Springtime for Hitler scene to the courtroom scene, and that I think you wouldn't lose much narrative-wise. What do you think?
Yeah, you could. The big change would be that Franz Liebkin wouldn't even be in the courtroom, because he wouldn't have done anything wrong if there wasn't the whole blowing up the theater subplot.
Right.
He wouldn't even be on trial. He wouldn't be, wrapped in bandages.
Right.
So yeah, you could, if that change was made, if Franz Liebkin wasn't even there, you could jump straight to the courtroom scene from the Springtime for Hitler number. That is true. You wouldn't have that great scene though in the office where Franz is trying to kill him.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing. I love that one line where it's like, how could this happen? I was so careful. I picked the wrong play, the wrong director, the wrong cast. Where did I go right?
Yeah,
I forgot if that was in there or if that was in the bar. I think that was in the
office.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's my other favorite line in the movie. Yeah. where did I go right? Yeah, that's great. That's great stuff. Also, when the director comes in congratulating them on the biggest hit on Broadway, right. and Max nearly murders them.
Right. Let's see, but yeah, that's if there's anything to complain about, which didn't really hamper my experience at all. Really, just one thing I've noticed, but that's the only negative critique I have to say for this film. Right.
Yeah, that's fair. So we've been dancing around it for a while now. Let's get to the real money shot here. Let's talk about Springtime for Hitler.
Right. First off, I've heard this even before I seen the movie. I've heard the catchy jingle before, and it is a catchy as fuck. We were talking about this before recording. It's like you just want to just hum it around or sing to it, but it's like the worst possible song you can ever sing to in public.
Yeah, beyond all the production and the number and the choreography and all that, but separate from the movie itself. It's a damn good song.
Yes,
it's really well done. Mel Brooks has a talent for this. He every one of his films has at least one sort of big musical number. Blazing Saddles has what's her name? She comes to the bar and performs that number. Madeline Kahn's character in that film, and then Young Frankenstein, of course, has Putting on the Ritz.
Yeah. Yeah. Putting on the Ritz!
History of the World Part 1 has the Inquisition, which is that's like neck and neck with Springtime for Hitler as far as being my favorite. And on and on and on. You get the picture. He's really good at that. And this is so him at the top of his craft in terms of that. He's so good. It's what it's like. It's like Trey Parker and Matt Stone, creators of South Park, who on top of being great at comedy, are also really good at making songs.
Right.
There are tons of songs in South Park and in Team America World Police, and then of course they went on to create Book of Mormon, the musical.
I still need to see that.
It's a lot like that.
Right.
It's wonderful.
Like there's you rarely really come across like super comedic, but also brilliant and catchy songs like the kind that Mel Brooks and Trey Parker and Matt Stone can make. And so it's really amazing when you're able to make something that's genuinely enjoyable, pleasing to the ears, almost really quotable.
Yeah, incredibly quotable.
Yeah,
I know every line in this song.
Don't be stupid, be a smarty. Come and join the Nazi party.
That's a great moment because that is Mel Brooks's cameo in the film. He's not actually on stage.
Oh wow!
What happened was he wasn't happy with the actor's read, so he dubbed his voice So he dubbed his voice over that actor. So it's only an audio cameo.
Oh wow!
But it would be a tradition because moving forward, Mel Brooks is in most of his movies.
Right.
Sometimes it's the main character.
Like, what was the character's name? Yogurt from Spaceballs, and he was also like a mayor.
Yogurt in Spaceballs.
Yeah, in Blazing Saddles.
He plays two characters in Spaceballs. He plays the evil. The president.
Right. Yeah, he was and
he plays Yogurt.
Yeah.
He plays two characters in Blazing Saddles: the governor and the Indian chief. He
what was it? He was what was his name? He was a Greek philosopher. What was it? A comic philosopher, or yeah.
Comicus. He actually has several roles in that film. He plays Comicus. He plays the Inquisition guy.
Yeah.
What's his name? Takamata. You can't talk him out of anything. He plays him. He plays King Louis and the other guy who looks like King Louis.
Right. It's good to be
during the French Revolution. Right. So he plays a lot of characters in that film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember if he has any roles in Young Frankenstein, actually, now that I think about it. I'm not sure if he played anybody in that or not.
I can't recall that ever happening.
But then you mentioned that you had seen Dracula Dead and loving it. He played Van Helsing in that movie.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
So yeah, he appears in most of his films.
Mm-hmm.
And it all began, I think, with him dubbing his own voice into the producers, saying, "Don't be stupid, be a smarty, come and join the Nazi party." God, it's just so well written, and the performance, these sort of it is straight out of an old Hollywood musical. It's very
what's the word? Produced. Like Singing in the Rain, those sort of like big, lavish, over the top musicals, and it's also
there's
funny. It's tap dancing also. Yeah.
There's tap dancing, there's synchronized walking in the shape of a swastika. There's
nearly topless women there.
There are showgirls decked out in all kinds of paraphernalia. You mentioned the woman before who's almost entirely topless.
Yeah.
She was originally supposed to have swastikas on her boobs.
Uh-huh.
And she objected.
Like that character from Dark Knight Returns.
Yeah, and she objected to that. She said, I've come too far in my career to wear swastikas on my nipples. So they replaced them with black eagles, which I think is better because it's a bit more subtle, and it saves the swastika imagery for the big moment where they begin marching in the shape of a swastika.
Right, which I'm thinking like you can only see that through that overhead shot. So I'm wondering, how are people meant to know what that shape is in the audience itself?
Right.
But then that's just me adding logic to this movie.
I mean, depending on if you were in a larger theater, then there would be people
in the higher rows.
Then there would be people, who could see it.
Mm-hmm.
But the theater that they're in is awful small, so that is true. That sort of does break the fourth wall a little bit, in that it's something that only sort of works for the audience at home.
Yeah, plot hole, movie sucks. We're cinema scenes when you need them. Ding!
Right. Ding. Ding. Yeah, what else happens? Oh, there's the moment where the pillars behind them turn into cannons, like on a Navy ship.
Yeah. Right, I remember that. What was it?
And all throughout this this sequence, you just cut to people in the audience, their mouths agape, as they stare in disbelief at what they're seeing.
Yeah. Well, Franz is like the proudest moment in Franz's entire life.
And the one couple gets up and they stop at the door and she goes, "Well, talk about bad taste." And then when the song's over, there's that awkward silence while everybody's just staring at the stage, and then the one guy in the middle of the crowd just goes, "Yeah!" And then they start beating him up.
Right. And then, like, eventually, as the play proceeds, and they go into Tommy Wiseau territories where LSD is providing a very ridiculous take on Hitler, and that's what brings everybody back.
There's a great German language joke where Eva Braun is sitting on a chair picking petals off a flower, saying, Zulit mir nicht, which is like, you love me, you love me not, obviously. And then at the end of it, Dick Shawn goes, I leave you. Now leave me alone.
And what I love about this whole thing, this whole satire, this was something that I mentioned to you right after we saw the movie together. And it was about how this movie tackles the sort of the satire of the jokes, like being able to make jokes surrounding something as horrific as Hitler and the Nazis, and compared to modern day sort of quote unquote edgy comedian types who attempt to do a similar thing, which they can't even hold a candle. That kind of like can't even hold a candle to this sort of Nazi humor per se.
Well, and the other thing is, the joke isn't even about the Holocaust or the Nazis, really.
Right? Yeah.
The joke is
that's a big thing. Like,
the joke is,
sorry, go ahead.
Look how the joke is, look how bad of an idea this is.
Right. They're not saying that any of this is a good idea, and at the same time, Mel Brooks goes out of his way to make these people look like the biggest clowns on earth.
Right.
And yeah, that's the thing. It's like he makes fun of them. He's pretending to glorify them, but at the same time mocking them. And this is a theme that
it's also a bit of interesting. I think it's also a bit of interesting commentary that the audience, which is at first disgusted, and they all start to walk out after the musical number. They come back when they realize that it's funny.
Right, and that like LSD's take on Hitler makes him out to be like a buffoon. Right.
In fact, you even hear like calling the other people back in the theater, going, "He's funny," and then they all come back in, like, "Oh, it's funny, no."
And yeah, and in comparison to certain, there's the also common quote unquote hilarious joke where someone just wants to get a reaction out of someone by saying something stupid like Hitler did nothing wrong. That it's sort of like joke, right? The edgy quote unquote edgy humor that's meant to get a rise out of someone and stuff like that by pretending to endorse Hitler in some way, shape, or form, which I really personally
there's no construction to that joke. There's no punchline or anything.
There's no build up, no punchline. It's just one single boom phrase to get a shock out of you. It's like the comedic equivalent to a jump scare in horror, if that makes if that makes any sense. I know I tend to say that a lot.
there's no cleverness,
right,
in that sort of a joke. Well, there is shock value, which can be fun, but there's no cleverness. It's like. And you can't make a clever Holocaust joke. My favorite Holocaust joke, I'll tell it now, is you go up to somebody and you say, my grandfather died in the Holocaust, and they say, "Oh, really?" And you're like, "Yeah," and you say, "He fell out of the guard tower. It was very sad." There's a setup. There's a misdirect. Great comedy always involves a misdirect, and then there's a punchline. You see?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and.
It wouldn't be as funny if I just came up to you and said, "My grandfather participated in the Holocaust."
Right. My grandfather hates the Jews. See,
that's not a joke.
That's
not a joke. That's just a lie, allegedly.
See, that was a build-up to that joke right there.
Yeah, see?
Yeah, so...
It's not that hard, people.
Yeah, I feel like the way Mel Brooks tackles this sort of humor, which I'm fairly certain this was considered edgy back in its time, was definitely a very well-crafted, brilliantly crafted, I would say, humor that succeeds on all angles, on all fronts. And so,
I think there was definitely some. I think there was definitely some drawback at the time from people over the sort of subject of the comedy.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Meanwhile, Charlie Chaplin was mocking Hitler while Hitler was still in office, and
that's very true.
And that movie is actually about Hitler, whereas this movie isn't even really about Hitler. It just sort of tangentially involves Hitler.
Right.
So, whatever.
Yeah. And I also would like to recommend, Lindsay Ellis's video on the producers, and she made a video analyzing the the style of Mel Brooks's comedies, and how I find it very interesting. She points out some very interesting connections. How he would often make fun of the Nazis on multiple cases, and that while he would make fun of the Nazis, it would never, being someone of Jewish descent, he would never talk about the horrific exploits of the Nazis. So he would make fun of those people, but he would never make fun of the suffering of the Jews and everyone else that the Nazis did horrible things to. And I find that sorry, go ahead.
I would like to go ahead and recommend. I would like to go ahead and recommend pretty much anything that Lindsay Ellis has on her channel. Honestly.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah.
She's probably the best.
Uh-huh.
She's probably the best of the people who survived Channel Awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, she's a really great cinematic commentator, if you can say that sort of thing.
Yeah.
If such a title exists, I meant to say.
Also literature. She does a lot of stuff about literature.
Oh, true. Yeah.
A wide range of topics, really.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't post all that often, so if you're looking for somebody who posts 3 videos a day, then this is not your pick.
Right. That's certainly not something the YouTube algorithm prefers, but hey, I can relate.
But we're not here to fully endorse Lindsay Ellis. We're here to fully endorse
Mel Brooks.
All right, Mel Brooks and his seminal film and producers. So let's see. We talked about Springtime for Hitler. I would recommend to everybody, if you have not seen this movie.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't seen the movie, go to YouTube right now. Well, not right now. Wait till the podcast is over, or pause the podcast and then. But whenever, go to YouTube, watch the Springtime for Hitler number on its own. Make sure you're watching the 1967 original version, because there is the 2005 version.
Mm-hmm. I'll
explain that in a minute. And just, even if you never see the rest of the movie, I think everybody should see this. It will shock you. It will amaze you. You'll be humming the song for days on end.
You'll be filled with that sort of energetic, musical spirit. You'll be shouting out from the top of your lungs, "Springtime for Hitler and Germany." And then you'll probably get cautious looks from everyone around you. I guarantee it.
Find yourself looking around on the bus or train to make sure that there are no yarmulkes to be seen.
No curly hairs, no Jufros.
And then you'll go into Germany was having trouble. What a sad story. And if you watch that musical number and you can't find the humor in it, then you're a joyless person, first of all. But also this is not the movie for you. So that might be a good litmus test, honestly.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. And you know what? I saw it first before I saw anything through other videos, and that's definitely what got me hooked on wanting to watch the producers once Dillion decided to fully endorse it.
Right. I kind of wish you hadn't seen it before, though, because it would have been great to get your fresh reaction. But I understand it's one of those things. It's the Statue of Liberty and Planet of the Apes.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of in that pop culture zeitgeist for anyone who is familiar with classic American comedies.
Yeah. Or mid 2000s musicals.
So you had something you wanted to say about the musical, the 2001 musical adaptation and the following 2005 adaptation / remake of The Producers.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to say about it because I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's fine. I just wanted to explain in case anybody in the audience wasn't aware that was it 2001 you said?
I believe so. I could be wrong, but I'll do a quick check right here.
The Producers was adapted into a Broadway play, which was very successful. Mel Brooks actually wrote all the music and everything for the movie, I believe. Somebody, I forget who it was.
2001.
He tells the story on the documentary. Okay. He tells the story on the DVD for the documentary. The producer approached him wanting to turn it into a Broadway play. He wasn't about it at first, but then the guy convinced him. Then that guy wound up having to pull out because he was busy with other stuff, and Mel just sort of did it on his own. So it was adapted into a Broadway production. It was very successful, and in 2005 they made a film version of that play version starring Matthew Broderick and Nathan Lane, who I believe were the original Broadway cast, although I might be wrong about that.
Right, yes. It was the two of them did star in both the film and the musical. I was going to say original musical,
right.
But then it's not really original, is it?
And if you're a Doctor Who fan, which is a lot harder to be these days, then you might be interested to know. That John Barrowman also has a small role in the 2005 musical film. So, might be worth checking out for that. It's not like he doesn't have any speaking lines or anything. He's in the musical number. He's the guy who comes down the stairs and sings "Springtime." You know, that whole chestnut that we just got to discussing. So yeah, that's out there. You can go check that out if you please. I'll watch it at some point, but cannot fully endorse it as I have not seen it.
Absolutely. But I will say that I'm very interested in checking it out. And,
yeah, I'm sure it's probably not as good, but probably it's its own animal because it's a musical. So there's going to be songs every couple minutes. It's going to be that sort of thing.
Absolutely, yes. And we're approaching, or maybe we've already passed the hour mark now. So I think we're just about ready to wrap up since we've talked about pretty much all the beats in the movie. Like I mentioned before, it's a very simple movie. It's not a very complex plot, but it's the execution, it's the actors, it's all the right elements put together into a masterpiece of comedy right here.
We should talk about the ending, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, after giving the speech in the courtroom and Max saying, we've learned our lesson and we'll never do it again, we cut to them in prison and they're doing it again. They're putting on a musical with the other prisoners. It's called Prisoners of Love. It's also a very catchy song, honestly. And they are selling all kinds of stock in the play to people, pulling the same old scam. It's some Billy McFarland shit, if ever I've seen some.
Although
there's been a real theme so far of con men on Fully Endorsed. We had Big Bucks, which wasn't really a con; it was just beating the system. And then we had Billy McFarland, and now we've got this. I'm gonna try to steer away from that in the future, just because I feel like we've had a lot of these back to back. But yeah, that's the end. That's the ending of the film, and I can't think.
Yeah.
I was going to say that's the ending of the film, and I can't think of a better ending, honestly.
Right. You know what? It reminds me so much of the ending for the Blues Brothers, where it ends on a musical in jail.
It also kind of reminds me of the end of Seinfeld, although I think it works a lot better here.
Yes,
where,
absolutely.
At the end of Seinfeld, they are all put in prison, and the last thing we see them doing is them behind bars, having I think the same conversation that they had in the first episode, although I might be wrong about that. So it's like a callback.
Yeah. And one last note about the ending. It's funny how they're getting stock, funds from a bunch of prisoners, and it's really funny that even the warden is involved in that. It's like, shouldn't the warden be smart enough for this? Thinking he can put in 50%, despite there's 50 other prisoners getting 50% as well.
Right. Yeah, that's true. Sorry, go ahead.
Producers.
That's the producers. I would definitely recommend everybody go checking it out, and I would also recommend that everybody track down the DVD of The Producers and watch the making of documentary. And this is an older DVD, so you have to flip the DVD over. It's on the B side.
It's one of those DVDs. I haven't seen one of those since those those 4-pack movies where it's two DVDs with a movie on each side.
Right, and maybe there's a newer release of the film that you don't have to do that with. I don't know. I'm just going off the version. I'm just going off the version that I have. The making of documentary is great. It's about an hour long. It's there are a lot of great. I dropped a lot of the big information in this review, but there's also a lot of just great anecdotes on there that are worth your time. Also, the story of how this became a hit is very interesting because the premiere was disastrous. Nobody came to see it, and then it wound up through a series of events that is very complicated. it wound up coming into the hands of Peter Sellers, who originally had told Mel Brooks that he would be Leo Bloom, if you remember at the beginning of this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
He wound up seeing a print of it, and he fucking loved it, and he started putting out ads in the paper saying you should go see this movie. This movie is amazing. This is the best movie I've ever seen. And so Peter Sellers wound up making this movie a hit because he just so happened to come into contact with a print of it.
Wow.
And had he not done that,
mm-hmm.
we would not have, any of the great Mel Brooks films that followed.
Yeah, you really don't see that happening a whole lot these days, where an actor can single-handedly save a film with a whole, hey, he's funny!
Hey, it's funny! Oh, it's funny? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And, of course, I would like to say that I can officially fully endorse this movie as well. And I want to give a big thanks to Dillion here for recommending the film in the first place. And now I can say that I've probably seen the majority of Mel Brooks's big hits. I still need to see Robin Hood Men in Tights. That's probably like the last big movie that I have yet to see. I haven't seen a lot of the, or at least in terms of like the mainstream Mel Brooks movies, if you can call them that.
Right. I would also recommend Silent Movie. It's pretty good.
Yeah, and you know what? I fully endorse Mel Brooks in general. He's a good man, and it'll be a really...
Mel Brooks is...
It'll be a truly
Mel
tragic...
Brooks is amazing.
Yeah, it'll be a truly tragic day it'll be when he eventually passes away from this mortal realm. But if I ever made a list...
Mm-hmm. If I ever made a list of my top 10 comedies, most of the list would probably be Mel Brooks movies. I might even have to just make one of the entries Mel Brooks in general, so that I would have room. So that I would have room on the list for other things and have more of a variety. But it would be a whole lot of Mel Brooks stuff. So the guy is a real legend.
Right. And the fact that he's still alive today, doing some projects here and there, is truly astonishing. And I just, God bless that man, that funny man.
Did.
All right, then. So, with that out of the way, I would like to give my recommendation for the next episode of Fully Endorsed, and this is a movie that has been frequently requested. I'm not sure if it's by several people or one individual that we covered this.
I think you're about to make one individual very happy.
Oh yeah, so this is a movie that I love so much that a lot of people that I feel that really needs a lot more attention than it deserves. This is from director Sam Raimi, who you may know as the director of the 3 Spider-Man movies, the Evil Dead trilogy, the future director for Doctor Strange 2, I believe. And so I want to talk about his first original movie. This was originally going to be a movie based on The Shadow, but being unable to secure the rights to The Shadow, and also Batman, I believe, Raimi decided to create his own character in a sort of pseudo hybrid of like Universal monster horror movie and pulp superhero action thriller, and that is the 1990 movie Darkman. So tune in next time, where I will share the film with Dillion, and we'll see what he thinks, and we'll see whether or not he can endorse it as much as I have over the years. It's one of my favorite superhero movies. It's just, I just love it. Again, it's sort of like it's got like all the right elements to make one hell of an action movie. So
I really hope I like it.
Yeah.
It's gonna be awkward.
Let's see, but we'll see then. So until next time, everybody. Oh yeah, I'll let you do the outro since this is your episode.
Oh yeah, right. So join us next time when we talk about Darkman. And until next time, what do we usually say? How do we end this podcast? It's late. I'm drawing a blank.
We tend to say a number of things, but I tend to say, ladies and gentlemen, that's exactly the way it's been.
Right, that's exactly the way it's been. Diabetes.
And I'm Andres Perez, aka Kaiju Noir, and until next time, everybody, take care.